Hello, and thank you for tuning in to another episode of our Pack Politics podcast. Guys, I am your host, Brady McDowell, and our podcast is brought to you by our organization, our United Resource PAC. We are a tax-exempt political organization. Guys, today I want to talk about what happened today. If you normally listen to our podcast, even though we don't have a set time that we put out episodes, you pretty much can count on them coming out early morning, afternoon. This is, while it's still in the afternoon today, it's a little bit later than we are normally accustomed to putting episodes out. Excuse me, kind of got distracted there for a second. But anywho, the reason is because we wanted to take a look at what happened today on the stock market. All I just have to ask is, can you see what is going on? Especially when you consider what has been going on with the stock market. It's been just going super duper well, for a lot of people. But today things actually didn't look so good. And I want to know if you're honest with yourself, can you see by looking at the stock market that we are about to enter a period of economic and market turmoil? Like, it's coming. Some might even argue that it's already here. Obviously, this show, our organization, is not a finance organization, so to say. I'm not here to give you any market advice. So just because we're talking about the stock market, do not think that that's what this is about. What we are about, we're a political organization. But I want to kind of, as they say, look at the signs of the times, because the signs are definitely here. That said, let's go ahead. Let's get the show started. It shouldn't be a long one, but it's important nonetheless. All right, so we are not a podcast that is about the market. We are a podcast that is all about politics, since we are a political organization. So that said, even though we're talking about the stock market today, if you are expecting me to be all wonky during that conversation and use market speak, I'm not going to do that, because that's not our target market, right? I'm going to kind of keep it simple, but we are going to talk about the stock market nonetheless. Again, we are a political organization, and we don't normally talk the stock market, but we need to talk about it, because especially what happened today is something that is impacting not just our current politics, like today's politics, but it is greatly going to impact the politics of the future, both the long and short-term future. So I don't know, how many of you invest in the stock market, have experience with it. But if you don't, you may have been hearing that there is apparently a disconnect, right? The reality for a lot of Americans is that they are really hurting. A lot of people are really looking at their pocketbooks, looking at their bills, looking at their refrigerators, thinking about, like, oh my gosh, I've been so negatively financially impacted by this pandemic. I don't know how we don't have a stimulus being passed, which is why, as an organization, we are focused on COVID-19 economic stimulus and relief, because we understand that for most people it's really needed. But when you look at the market and what's been happening, things have been going really, really well. Like, you've been seeing some all-time highs with various stocks, and things have just been like so amazing. Now, for some sectors, it's obvious why that has maybe happened. For instance, you know what? I'm not gonna get into that. But anywho, all of that said, again, when you look at the market and you look at what's happening with everyday average people, the expectation that the markets would carry on as they had been pretty recently, that expectation for most people was something that they knew was going to happen. They knew that, okay, the stock market is performing really well. It's not going to happen long term. It's not something that's going to last forever. So the disconnect that we've been seeing for most people who really know the markets, they knew that this time was going to come, a time like today, a time where the stock market was like, whoa, my gosh, right? Like, what the heck happened? So I'm not going to delve too much into the specifics of what kind of happened today. If you want to hear all about that, I will direct you to not a specific podcast that it talks about the stock market, but go and search that out for yourself, because I don't want to kind of feel like I'm giving anybody any type of financial advice or anything like that, because again, we're not that type of organization. So anywho, all of this said, we are now less than 2 months away from the election. And a lot of people, well, not a lot of people, let me take that back. For some people, for the people who have been they've been riding high with what's been going on in the stock market, you're now having them, especially today, saying, oh my gosh, the stimulus, we are seeing the effects of the economy not being stimulated. And that's why we've seen what we saw today, which was we saw just the stock market take a plunge, right? And quite frankly, this is not as bad as it's going to get. Like, we are approaching a time, if we continue to be in a space where we're not afforded economic stimulus and relief by our politicians, things are going to get worse. If you go and you look back in history, and you look at, I believe it's 6 out of the last 14 recessions that we've had. So a little bit less than half of those recessions, the stock markets, what happened is they didn't reach the bottom until a recession was about 80% complete. Because we are, well, just put it like this, we are not more than 80% complete with this recession. So when you consider history, it is more likely than not that things are going to get worse. I mean, you don't even really honestly have to look at history to kind of look around and be able to tell, given the current environment, the lack of a vaccine, lack of cohesion with response to the pandemic, lack of economic stimulus. There are many, many things outside of looking at the historical data that we have that would lead you to think that things are actually going to get worse with the stock market. Now, in all fairness, most people didn't know when we had the stimulus happen back in March. Most people didn't know how effective the stimulus was going to be. But obviously, data was taken into consideration. But even with that data taken into consideration, politicians didn't know if the funding and support that they were going to throw at Americans, at our economy, was going to be enough to kind of withstand what was forecasted to come in the form of a recession. And kind of speaking of history, if you look at, because if you've listened to pretty much any news outlet, anybody speak about the financial side of what's going on with COVID, a lot of times it's compared to the Great Depression. And when you look at the administration that we had at that time, the Hoover administration, one of the things that I really kind of think most people need to really look at is that the Hoover administration actually did very little to intervene with the economy when the Great Depression was going on. So just how we have that precedent kind of, well, I don't want to say a precedent because it's a little less than 50%, but just how we have the data to look at to say, okay, the stocks don't really bottom out until we're about 80% done with the recession. We also can kind of look back at a previous administration and look and see what happens when the country is not afforded stimulus, when they're not afforded intervention in the middle of great financial distress for the country. So that's a little bit of history for you. So I'm going to kind of leave that there before we kind of go into our next segment. But again, the market, what we've been seeing as far as this disconnect, both when you look at history, we have I don't want to say a precedent, but we do have data that we can look at that we can say, okay, is it likely that things are going to get worse? Is it likely that we're looking at the worst now? It is more likely than not that things are going to get worse. And again, when we specifically look at look at the question of should we or should we not stimulate the economy, we do have a precedent set in terms of an administration where we can look and say, okay, when an administration fails to adequately stimulate the economy, and the key word here is adequately stimulate the economy, what happens, what's the turnout. Anywho, so that's all I'm going to say about that. Let's actually now talk about the 2020 election and what that means for the stock market as we see it now. We talked a little bit about history. Let's actually jump into the future, because the future is coming up on us in about 6 weeks. All right, so we looked at very, very briefly, we looked at what happens with an economy that is dealing with a depression, a recession, and kind of what we can expect in terms of when things kind of bottom out in relation to the stock market. We also considered and kind of very briefly mentioned the previous administration, the previous Hoover administration, and how things turned out. Well, obviously, it's how, we obviously see how things turned out under the Hoover administration when you look at the Great Depression, right? So what does this all mean for today? What should we kind of how do we look at and consider all of that information and make it relevant to this upcoming 2020 election when we see what's going on before our eyes with the stock market? Again, if you're like, well, what the heck are you talking about is going on with the stock market? It was bad today. It was bad. If you want to know the details of how bad it was, if you want to know all the specifics, I'm not going to turn this into some very wonky podcast episode. You can go and search for some sort of podcast, which I will not recommend, that talks about the stock market. Everyone knows that, as I mentioned before I ended the last segment, that we are less than 2 months away from the November election. What we saw today in terms of the stock market and how horribly it performed today, I don't care what anybody says to you. The only thing that I will tell you about the stock market is that what you saw today was an indication of how investors are feeling due to a lack of stimulus. Everyone thought that whether it was, after the July 31st expiration date came and went for that $600 for the unemployed, or other types of stimulus that we had, what we're seeing now, with funds being depleted, with the, businesses using those funds and then being just long gone from the PPP. When you look at everything that's happening, when you look at what the airlines are going through and the fact that they're going to be laying off thousands of people, here in a few days, few weeks, people did not think that we were going to still be in a position of demanding and needing stimulus. We thought, first and foremost, that first kind of set of stimulus that we had was enough, because if you remember what they were saying at the time, this isn't going to be so long, just a few weeks and we'll be over it, poof, that will be gone. Obviously, here we are months later, and that's not the fact. The fact is, this is going on far beyond what any of us thought would happen. And when you couple that with the fact that we are not only not receiving any stimulus, this current environment is one in which it is ever more apparent that the likelihood of receiving stimulus is just diminishing by the day, by the hour, by the second. All of this is why we saw what we saw today with the stock market. There is no hope for stimulus. And when you look at the fact that as we approach the election, as I mentioned in another episode, I've actually mentioned it in several episodes, as we get closer to the election, there is absolutely a lack of incentive to stimulate the economy on the parts of politicians. Everyone knows, God rest her soul, RBG passed away. Um, and that in and of itself is causing you now have Republicans kind of saying, okay, we've got to make sure we, fill that seat before the election because we obviously have a president who can do it. Then you have, the Democrats, and that's actually interesting. Another show for another day. You have specifically on that subject, you have politicians who have said before that if they were in a time particularly like this, they would actually let the next president go ahead and do that. But it's another subject for another day. You have that. You have, did you hear our government is supposed to be shutting down? We need more funding. We previously, it was agreed that we would kind of just pass the funds just by themselves to go ahead and fund the government. But now we have the Democrats demanding, no, you know what? If you want anything done, we need a comprehensive stimulus package. So we kind of got a lot of things going on that are making this situation worse. And again, as we get closer to the election, it is less and less likely that anything is going to be done. This is why we saw what we saw today on the market. It used to be in previous weeks that the only people, who were dealing with the realities of the pandemic and the negative financial implications of it. It used to be, as recently as a few weeks ago, that the only people who really were feeling that were individual Americans because their personal forms of stimulus had run out. Their true eviction moratoriums had run out unless their states and localities had decided to do something. Their extended unemployment benefits had run out. Their one-time stimulus check, that money was gone for most people the day that they found out they were getting it. They had already planned what bills they needed to pay that they were behind on. Those people already knew how bad things were. But now businesses who had stimulus well beyond what the average American had received, they are now in a position where their stimulus has dried up. Again, look at what's going on with the airline industry, and they're coming with their hands out. Help us, please help us. And I'm not, okay, we're not even going to go there. I think I mentioned that on a previous episode. I'm going to leave that alone. But they are coming with their hands out now, demanding help. They are, hey, you need to help us because it's freaking bad out here, right? Now everybody is feeling the effects, and that is why we are now seeing the stock market panic. Not to be mean, but the average American isn't invested in the stock market. I mean, while I would wish in my own personal kind of mind, in my own personal heart, I would wish that more Americans could invest in the stock market. But your average American doesn't invest in it. I think it's somewhere like 40% of Americans actually invest in the stock market. But that fact considered, that estimate considered, it has not been the people who are the people that are mostly invested in the stock market are not your average people, and those people again have been very, very disconnected from reality, and they're just now getting their own personal dose of reality, right? And again, markets are going to get worse. They understand with what they're seeing that the data and our current reality, just looking at these politicians, shows us things are going to get worse, and so investor fears are rising. They are actually selling. I'm going to be very honest and transparent here. Again, I'm not making this about I'm not giving anybody any type of investment advice. So I'm just saying that up front. I'm just telling you, I'm about to tell you what has been my personal experience in the stock market. I invest in stocks, and I also invest in crypto. And so early on, when everything was kind of happening, I while a lot of people were kind of singing the praises of the stock market, how I mentioned earlier that things were going so well and prices were just going and going and going and people were just making money and making, I, not even looking at the data, but just kind of looking at the reality of what was going on before looking at the data and then kind of having it reinforced when looking at data, I knew, oh, heck no, like I've got to pull out. So not too long ago, I'm not going to say exactly when, because again, I don't want to make this seem like I'm telling people, oh, you should have done this when I did, or these were the key indicators that I use. Just put it like this. I had made a decision not too long ago. I sold every stock that I had. I was like, no way, I'm out of this. Like there's no way you're going to find me mixed up in this. I then took some of that money and went full liquid. And then I took some of that money and I went into crypto. I was already in crypto, but I strengthened my position in crypto with cryptocurrency. I made what some might call kind of a dumb decision to kind of look at to invest in some forms of currency that I had no experience in. And that position cost me money. I lost about 30% of what I put into all of my crypto. I lost about 30% and ended up saying, you know what, I'm going to just go and just leave this and go full on liquid, right? So, anywho, I personally, not because I'm some genius, because I'm not. I'm a very specific type of trader. Some people they trade for the long term. I don't. I'm not gonna make this about trading. So, anyways, so just put it like this: Brittany pulled out. I didn't do this because I'm so smart. I didn't do this because I'm better. Because if I were, I'd have a lot more money than I do, right? But I saw the writing on the wall, and I'm not saying that people who didn't see the writing on the wall, I'm not saying that anything was wrong with them not seeing the writing on the wall. But hopefully they see it now. Hopefully they see that these recent months of what's been going on, this high people have been riding on, it's not sustainable, and it really could only last so long, right? As we move closer to the election, chances are it's going to get worse, even after the election. Quite frankly, you know what? I'm not going to even say that because I don't want to, I'm trying to be careful with what I say. So I'm just going to leave this here. And I say all of this not because I wanted to make today's show exclusively about the stock market, because I wanted to talk about it or talk about how I went full on liquid. I wanted to talk about this because it's important for one, the people who have known that we've been in this bad position, your average American, to know that now business is starting to fill it. Now people who have been riding high, denying the realities that you have been feeling and knowing, they are now getting that confirmation that you have been right. We need more stimulus. Now, I hate to break it to you. Does this mean that we are likely to see a stimulus package before the election? Does this mean that I change my mind and say, you know what, because of this and because they're seeing the light now, we're going to see a stimulus before the election? Honestly, guys, I don't believe so. I honestly am willing to still stand on my position of the fact that it's very unlikely that we're going to see some form of stimulus before the election. What I do think this means is that how in the last episode, I think it was directly the last episode, I talked about how you're not really hearing stimulus being talked about really in the mainstream really anymore. I do think what this means is we are going to see kind of a reinvigorated conversation. Is that conversation going to lead to action? No. In Brittany's opinion, no. But is it going to lead to a renewed, reinvigorated conversation? Yes. That, I think, is hope. I know that, hope and change has been the name of the game for the last how many years, and I know a lot of people are losing hope. And I don't want to um, pacify you just by saying, oh, hope and change, it's all going to be okay. No, because it's quite frankly, unless we all collectively take action, it's not going to be okay. But there is hope in knowing that we can rectify this issue. There is action that we can take. There is something we can do to make this better. What can we do? We'll talk about that in just a moment. Are you on Facebook? We're on Facebook. Check out our Facebook page in the description box of this episode. We have our blog posts, we share our latest episodes, we share relevant information related to COVID-19 economic stimulus and relief. Again, we do it all on our Facebook page. Check it out in the description box of this episode. See you there. So when we look at what's going on with the stock market, when we understand that the people who have been riding high are now being impacted, when we understand that this conversation for COVID-19 economic stimulus and relief for the American people is going to be reinvigorated, that we are going to see more discussions, despite the fact that we've been seeing less about our need for economic stimulus. How do we turn? How can we make this work for us, right? One of the things that I want to start doing as part of our podcast is I want to talk about solutions. I've mentioned before that our podcast is not just some news podcast where we talk about like the latest news stories. We're not a news organization. We are a political organization, right? And we are involved in politics. We are involved in running ads for and against politicians that aren't working in the best interest of the American people on the issue of COVID-19 economic stimulus and relief. So what is as an organization, what is our solution to the fact that it's unlikely that we are going to see not just any meaningful stimulus, really any stimulus before the election? And how do we capitalize on the fact that it is likely that we are going to see an increase in conversation around this need? The solution is for you to understand this. Politicians, especially those who were looking to deny you the support that you need, even just temporarily in the form of economic stimulus, what they are counting on is they are counting on voter amnesia. They are counting on voter complacency. They are counting on you not remembering what they did to you when you go to vote. They are counting on you not remembering. Let's say that the same people who deny you economic stimulus that you need as an American, let's say that they retain their seats if they're up for re-election, or let's say that they're not up for election in this current cycle and they're up in the next cycle. They're up for re-election in the next cycle. They are counting on you not remembering that next time around. They are counting on maybe you remembering it, but they're counting on it not really mattering to you in that moment. I'm not one for holding grudges, because I definitely believe that if you hold a grudge, it's like you drinking poison and expecting the other person to die, right? I'm sure we've all heard that quote. But there is a difference between holding a grudge and saying, you know what, I remember that you did not stand for the American people. And I'm telling you, you cannot let them be right. You have to remember. Remember 2020. Remember every hardship that your family has had. Remember every job application that you put in that you didn't hear a response from. Remember every attempt that you made to call the unemployment line that went on the phone for hours and hours without a response. Remember that. Remember every time you listened to the TV and you heard politicians say that that extra stimulus that you needed, that you depended on, was something that was holding you back from getting a job. Remember that. Remember that when you go to the polls. But what you also need to do is you also need to remember other forms of political involvement that you can have. I recently saw, not saying that, I agree or disagree with it, but I recently saw where you had protesters outside of Mitch McConnell's, one of his homes. I'm not saying I agree with that because, you definitely can cause for some unhealthy situations. Again, I'm not going to say do that, don't do that, but I will say this, something that I've said before. We have seen with a specific issue in this country that protesters are out. I believe that people absolutely have a right to protest, but I do ask you to consider just how I talk about this economic stimulus that we receive and how it needs to be adequate, it needs to be effective. I want you to consider how adequate and effective your means of political involvement are. Now, am I saying that marching in the streets is not effective? No, I'm not saying that. But I will say that there are other more effective and efficient means of political involvement. I beg the question that I do all the time. The people that we know to have the most political power, do you see them out marching in the streets? Do you see them in the front of politicians' homes demanding their tax breaks? You don't. What are they doing? These people are giving funds to organizations like ours, or they are giving funds directly to political candidates that they support. So that way those candidates can fund political ads against opponents, can fund political ads to get the truth out about themselves, can fund political ads to sustain their political life, right? Now, obviously, as a plug, I'm going to tell you, maybe you should consider an organization like ours, an organization that, as a nonprofit political organization, what we do is we run political ads for and against political candidates. Does not matter the party, because we are not affiliated with any political organization. We're organized and we operate primarily not to do a podcast, but for the purpose of making independent expenditures, fancy way of saying running political ads, so we can influence the selections, nominations, and elections and appointments to or removal from not just federal office, but state office and even local public office. Okay? So we run political ads. Okay? We are one of the ways that you can opt to have political impact, because I can guarantee you, while not saying you will, but while you may have amnesia or other people may have amnesia, we are not going to forget what these politicians did to Americans. When the conversation goes on and people start talking about other things, the latest scandal, we are not going to forget that these politicians sat on their hands and called for a pause. They might pause, but we are not going to. Our cause is going to go on. Our cause as an organization is to look at these politicians and say, we're not going to have amnesia. You can't count on us having amnesia. You may not be up for re-election right now, but when you are, trust and believe, we are running political ads reminding all of your constituents that you did nothing to help them. Are there going to be some people who look at those ads and say, oh, that was so long ago, we don't really care? Of course. Are there going to be those people who literally can't remember because things are so great for them? Maybe. But there are going to be some people who look at those ads and say, you know what? I was starting to maybe kind of like this person because they had, they ran ads about themselves out petting dogs and kissing babies. But you know what? I saw this ad and I remember what these people did to me. This ad reinforced the fact that these people did not help me. This is what we do. This is what we do. Now, let's say you don't decide to work with organizations like ours. Let's say you decide to say, you know what? I'm just going to give my money to a candidate. That's fine too. That is absolutely fine. And you don't have to give big amounts, okay? These organizations, these corporations that typically fund politicians' campaigns, which is why these campaigns and these politicians typically pander to them so much. Of course, they are giving millions and thousands of dollars. The average American can't do that, right? But you can give $5, $10, whatever you can give to go towards a politician that maybe you notice has been a champion of getting you COVID-19 economic stimulus and relief. Do what you can do. And if you cannot give money, that's okay too. What you can do is you can call your elected officials. Put it on your calendar. Call them every day. Bug them. Write them. When you see them on social media, put a hashtag and talk to them. Ask them questions. Are they all going to answer you? Probably not. But at the very least, the information that's going to be shown when they're hashtag or when they're searched for, hey, people will be reminded in that way, and that's free to you. I'm not gonna go on here, but I want you to think about the solution, because what we've seen in the stock market is not likely to get us the stimulus that we need before the election. It's not likely to happen. But what is likely to happen is that the conversation is going to start again. That you can count on. But that alone is not enough. A conversation happening is not enough to hold these politicians accountable for not helping you. You are the reason that they have a job. You are their employer. It's your interests that they are supposed to be working for. Now, sometimes does that mean that they have to help organizations here and there to do what's in the best interests of their constituents? Absolutely. And do what's in the best interest of this economy and country? Absolutely. But do they and should they always be pandering to business? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I don't know, guys. That's all I'm going to say about that. Hey, this is Brittany. Just wanted to shoot you a quick reminder. Look in the description box of this episode and you can find a link to our website. On our website, you can find our latest blog posts. You can find our contact information. You even want to make a contribution, you can go over there and do that as well. You can find out the policies we are looking at and targeting as an organization. You know, I say all the time that we are a tax-exempt political organization. If you want to know more about that, again, go on over to our website, our-pac.com, where you can find out everything you want to know. You can do everything you want to do. We will gladly welcome you on our website with open arms. Again, check out our website in the description box below. All right, guys. So thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of our PAC Politics podcast. The stock market is speaking to us, and I really hope that some people are finally listening, despite the fact that what they've been listening to this point has been false. The fact that things are so good and doing so well, because for the average American, that has not been the case. But I'm going to be very frank with you listeners here. For those of you who have seen the writing on the wall for a while and known that we needed more economic stimulus to deal with the ramifications of COVID-19, the fact that we're going to see an increase in the conversation around the need for stimulus is definitely not going to increase our chance for actually receiving a stimulus. it is just going to increase our chances of hearing about it from the mainstream media. So I don't want to give you guys some false hope that hope and change is coming because of the fact that the economy, that the stock market, today didn't do so well, and that businesses are demanding hope and change. And I'm going to say the same thing to them. You're not going to get it, right? So thank you again for tuning in. I look forward to seeing you guys on Wednesday. This is our first week in the last 2 weeks that we will now have a full week of episodes. The previous weeks we have been off on days that we were supposed to have the show, but this week we are here all week. So I'll see you Wednesday as scheduled. Have a good day, guys. And again, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of our PAC Politics Podcast. Have a good one. Bye-bye.